At 2:40 in the morning, on a frozen ridge outside Bastogne, an American machine gunner opened fire on a German tank. There was no tank, only a black pine stump half buried in snow, shaking under the recoil of his own weapon. Beside him, another soldier kept whispering to his dead brother. A third man stood in his foxhole with his eyes open, rifle in both hands, already asleep. The company had not broken because the Germans were too close. It was breaking because the men had been awake for almost 70 hours. No warm barn, no real relief, no darkness safe enough to close their eyes. Just artillery in the distance, frozen boots in shallow holes, and a line of exhausted infantrymen trying to defend ground their own minds no longer recognized. The enemy in front of them wore German gray. The enemy already inside the line had no uniform at all. It was the clock. First Sergeant Nathan Red Crow saw it before any officer admitted it. He was 32 years old, Lakota, raised in the hard country of South Dakota, and he had the kind of calm that did not announce itself. Men did not follow him because he shouted. They followed him because when shells fell, his voice stayed the same. That night, his voice was the last steady thing on the ridge. He moved from foxhole to foxhole under the black trees, bending close to men who stared through him as if he were part of a dream. Name. The soldier blinked. Name, rank, hometown. Sometimes the answer came, sometimes it did not. Private Mercer from Kansas City told Red Crow there were horses coming through the wire. There were no horses. Corporal Laird kept insisting that snowflakes were landing upward. They were not. A young replacement named Billy Sloan grabbed Red Crow by the sleeve and begged him not to let the river rise. There was no river within a mile. That was when Red Crow understood the line was no longer being defended by soldiers. It was being defended by bodies that happened to still be holding rifles. The Ardennes winter had done what German artillery had failed to do. It had turned time into a weapon. The breakthrough had scattered units across Belgium like broken teeth. Roads were jammed with trucks. Radios died in the cold. Fog and snow kept Allied aircraft on the ground. Men who had been promised a quiet sector suddenly found themselves holding crossroads, ridges, and tree lines that mattered only because if they fell, everything behind them would open. This company had been told to hold until relieved, but relief had become a rumor. By the third night, ammunition was counted more carefully than sleep. Rations mattered more than judgment. Officers looked at maps, not faces, and every hour the men stayed awake. Their minds gave up another inch of reality. Captain Elias Ward, the company commander, knew the ridge had to hold. Captain Samuel Greer, the battalion surgeon, knew the men could not. They met in the cellar of a shattered farmhouse, where a lantern burned low beside a field telephone. Ward had snow frozen into the seams of his coat. Greer had a notebook full of names that were starting to look like casualty lists before the men were actually dead. "They're seeing things," Ward said. Greer did not look up. "That's because they've gone past exhaustion." One man tried to bayonet a shadow. "Then take him off the line." "I take him off. There's a gap. You leave him there. He may shoot the man next to him." Ward slammed a gloved fist against the table. "We have Germans in the woods." Greer finally raised his eyes. "No, Captain. You have Germans in the woods, and you have a company hallucinating in front of them." The sentence stayed in the cellar like smoke. Ward asked for stimulants. Greer refused. Ward demanded clearance to keep every man in position until dawn. Greer refused again. The surgeon was not soft. He had stitched men under shell fire. He had cut boots off feet already turning black from frostbite. But he knew the body had limits, and he knew the mind had limits before the body did. "You cannot order biology to salute," Greer said. Ward stepped closer. "I can order men to hold ground." Greer pointed toward the door. "Those are not men holding ground anymore. They are ghosts with loaded rifles." The call went up through battalion before anyone could stop it. By the time the staff car reached the farmhouse, the eastern sky was still black, and the wind had sharpened enough to cut through wool. The general who stepped out was not there for ceremony. He was a hard-faced Third Army officer with a frozen scarf, mud on his boots, and two aides who looked too tired to breathe. He listened to Ward. He listened to Greer. Then he asked one question: how many men can still tell you where they are? Nobody answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. The general walked outside without another word. Red Crow was coming up the trench line, dragging a half-conscious private by the back of his coat. The general watched him shove the man down into a dugout, pull another soldier upright, and make him recite his name, rank, and hometown, until the words came clean. Then the general turned to Ward. That first sergeant still knows what he's looking at. Ward's face tightened. He's an enlisted man, sir. The general's eyes did not move. And right now, he is the only leader on this ridge managing the thing that is killing your company. The order came down cold and plain. Red Crow would take control of the fighting rotation. 1/3 of the company would sleep for 2 hours at a time in the reverse, slope holes and the broken cellar spaces behind the ridge. 2/3 would hold the forward line. The steadiest men would stay on the heavy machine guns, the observation slits, and the wire. The worst cases would sleep first, whether they agreed or not. Every non-commissioned officer still on his feet would make rounds every 20 minutes. Each man on watch would answer 3 questions: name, rank, hometown. If he could not answer, he was pulled back. If he fell asleep standing, he was dragged back. If he saw tanks in empty trees, he was not mocked. He was replaced. It was not mercy instead of discipline. It was discipline rebuilt around mercy because the old version had stopped working. Ward wanted to argue, but in that moment a rifle cracked from the left flank. Then another, not at Germans, at nothing. A private in a forward hole had fired twice into the dark because he believed a hand was reaching out of the snow. Red Crow reached him before anyone else did. The boy swung the muzzle toward him. For half a second. Every man nearby froze. Red Crow did not raise his own weapon. He stepped forward, bare hand open in the cold, and said the boy's name once, then again. Then a third time, lower the rifle dipped. The private began to cry without sound. That was the darkest minute on the ridge. Not because the enemy had broken through, because the line had nearly killed itself before the enemy arrived. After that, no one argued with the rotation. Red Crow built the ridge into a clock. 2 hours down, 4 hours up, 20-minute checks, hot coffee where they could make it. Mittens traded, socks changed if a man still had dry ones. No one alone on a gun. No man trusted with darkness by himself. He put a corporal from Minnesota beside a private from Georgia, because the corporal still knew the challenge code, and the private could still feed belts into the gun. He moved the men who were seeing things into the deepest dugout, packed shoulder to shoulder like cargo, and ordered them to sleep, even while shells thumped beyond the trees. Some resisted, some cursed him. Some begged not to be taken away because they thought leaving the line meant cowardice. Red Crow told them the truth. You sleep now, or you fail everyone later. That was all. He did not make a speech about honor. He did not call them weak. He treated sleep like ammunition, a thing that had to be rationed, protected, and delivered to the right place before the attack came. By 4:30, the first sleeping shift had been down for 90 minutes. By 5, some of them woke not rested, but returned. Their eyes focused. Their hands stopped wandering. They remembered where Belgium was. They remembered which direction the Germans would come from.
Oh me from. And then, just before dawn, the tree line moved. A German probe came through the snow in short rushes, low and careful, testing for the weak point they expected to find. They found weakness, but not collapse. The first American fire was ragged. Some rifles answered late. One mortar round fell short enough to shower the forward holes with dirt and ice. A half-awake gunner jammed a belt and swore until his assistant cleared it with shaking hands. But the heavy gun on the right kept firing. Then the one in the center. Then the left flank found its rhythm.
Red Crow moved behind them with his carbine slung and his hands free because he needed to grab men more than he needed to shoot. Name, rank, hometown. The questions sounded insane under fire, but they kept men inside the world. A soldier who could say, Private First Class Daniel Reese, Omaha, Nebraska, was less likely to aim at a tree. A man who could remember his hometown could still remember where the enemy was. The German patrol pressed harder for 20 minutes. Then 30, the ridge bent. It did not open. When the attack finally pulled back into the pines, the company was still there. Not brave in the clean way stories. Like to say it, filthy, frozen, half delirious, still alive. At 7:20 that morning, the relief column came up the road behind them, men stumbling beside trucks crusted with snow. No bugles, no flags, just engines, chains, and faces gray with the same winter. The first fresh lieutenant reached the ridge and began asking for a report. Nobody answered him, because the men on the line had started falling asleep where they stood. One dropped beside the machine gun, another folded at the knees with his helmet still on. A third sat down in the snow and was asleep before his back touched the trench wall. 114 men had held the ridge through the night. By mid-morning almost all of them were unconscious. Not dead, not routed, just gone, at last into the sleep that had almost killed them by staying away. Red Crow did not sleep with the first group or the second. He walked the position once more after relief came in, checking the guns, the wire, the holes, the men tucked into blankets in the cellar. Only when the last original sentry had been replaced did he sit with his back against a frozen stone wall. His hands shook then, not before. Only then the official paperwork did not know how to tell the story properly. It mentioned fatigue. It mentioned temporary command adjustment. It mentioned defensive continuity under adverse winter conditions. Paper had no word for what it looked like when a man talks a whole company back from the edge of madness, one name at a time. Captain Ward was removed from front-line command after the sector stabilized. The report did not call him a coward. It called his judgment impaired by operational pressure, which is the Army's colder way of saying he forgot his men were human. Captain Greer kept practicing medicine through the rest of the campaign. Men remembered him as the doctor who said no when no was the only honest answer. The general moved on before noon. Generals always did. There were more roads to clear, more bridges to hold, more maps demanding decisions from men who had slept too little themselves. But the ridge remembered Red Crow. So did the soldiers who woke hours later in barns, cellars, and truck beds with no memory of how close they had come to firing on friends, wandering into the trees, or freezing upright with their eyes open. Years after the war, some of them would still write his name at Christmas. Not because he had charged a bunker, not because he had stood on a tank with a flag, because in the worst cold of the worst winter they had ever known, he understood something command had forgotten. A company is not a machine, courage is not fuel without limit, and a line held by sleepless men is already collapsing, even before the enemy reaches it. Nathan Red Crow returned to South Dakota after the war with a limp from the frostbite and a silence he did not explain easily. He worked, he raised children, he attended ceremonies, he carried the ridge without turning it into a story about himself. The men he saved told it anyway. They said he did not defeat the cold. He did not defeat the Germans alone. He defeated the panic that told officers the only way to hold a line was to spend every man at once. The ridge held because one sergeant looked at a battlefield and saw the hidden battle underneath it. The war for the road was being fought with rifles. The war for the company was being fought with sleep. And before dawn came through the frozen pines, Nathan Red Crow won the second war just in time to keep the first one from being lost.